the media seemed to get ahead of the it seemed to get ahead of the Department of Defense, which is really odd, Jennifer. So will you break that down a little bit?
Yeah, it's very odd. So there was two basic components to the piece that I wrote, and it took me about 9 hours yesterday to write it
Wow.
because things kept changing
Yeah.
as I started to write. I was just writing about the Pentagon briefing and basically how he didn't learn anything through that. They basically said, "Oh well, we made rules and he broke them, so it's not our bad. Like we don't have to change anything." I mean, no, that's not really how this works. So originally, back a week ago, Reuters reported, based on anonymous sources, of course, that this leak came from Russia or Russian sympathizers. So then you hear nothing for a few days. And then all of a sudden, Washington Post has this story Wednesday night that in an interview with someone else from that Discord forum saying that the guy who posted them was in his 20s, was a military guy. And of course, they made him out like some wet dream of like a MAGA supporter so that they could
Right.
probably target that audience in the future. And so
Exactly.
that the next morning they wake up, and I said to some of my colleagues, I said, I bet the guy's attached to Fort Bragg somehow, just because I know the role that Fort Bragg plays in our war, especially with all the special operations. And I used to live near Fort Bragg, so I knew a lot of the officers there, so kind of had that knowledge. So I get up the next morning, and sure enough, Wall Street Journal's reporting that the guy was attached to Fort Bragg. Then a few hours later, nope, he's this Massachusetts Air National Guard guy. And the interesting thing to me was that Wall Street Journal completely almost rewrote their story, but didn't even put any editor's note or anything, just changed it.
Okay, yeah. Now that just I don't get that at all. I mean, obviously, it would be pure speculation on our part or my part, but
Right.
or are they just? I don't on it. Well, let me just say this: I don't get that at all. Well, why would
Right.
something like that happen in your opinion? And they wouldn't even reference that they had made any type of editing changes whatsoever.
Right.
Doesn't make sense to me at all.
I mean, I'm a managing editor at Red State, so I deal with corrections and updates every day at
Right.
stories at Red State. And I know we have guidelines. If we were to substantially change a story like that, we would have to leave the original part in and put some kind of update or clarification and maybe something, our sources said whatever and it was mistaken. We apologize for the error. Here's what it really was. But there was nothing. It was like they were memory holing it. And then NBC News did a similar thing. First, they said that they had been, it wasn't monitoring, but following or tracking this guy for a while, that they'd been aware of him. And then that was deleted. Luckily, I had a screenshot before I could archive it. But then the next thing was like we had been on to him for a while because within
Right.
military speak, things like monitoring and tracking have actual meaning. And
Right.
so on to him is a lot more vague. Then within an hour, that paragraph was just gone completely. So if they were tracking him, why didn't they know in March, only 6 weeks ago, that he was posting this stuff on Discord?
Yeah, and I'd like to know honestly. I just think there's a much bigger issue here at play, Jennifer. I mean, this guy has been posting, from what I've read, at least since December.
Yeah, December, January, what I heard.
Yeah, so this is absolutely astonishing to me. It says a lot about our military leadership, in my opinion. But does it? What does it say about our capabilities that we have? I mean, this is really scary to me. It's scary to me that I mean, this kid is. I don't know the full story, but from what I've read, it appears to be a kid that made a horribly stupid mistake, and he's going to pay a severe price for it. But
Right.
I just feel like that's the micro story. The macro story is what the heck is going on with our media and what the heck is going on with the commander in chief and our military leadership. How could we let this happen and set for months and months and months on end?
Right. And there's so many parts to the story. This is not going to be a simple soundbite story. There's why was this other kid from the forum that's under 18? He was shopped around by his mother. He spoke to the New York Times reporter, one of the guys that wrote the original story on the leak, last Saturday. Then he spoke to Washington Post. So why is this mom taking him to media outlets and not the officials, especially given the gravity of the information that's contained in these leaks?
Yeah, and that's such a good point. That's what I wondered about that as well. And again, I'm speaking to Jennifer Van Laar. She's with redstate.com. You can check out her writings there. She's the managing editor there. But yeah, that was very weird to me too. I'm like, did this kid? I'm just speculating. Could he have tipped off the FBI? Did he get a sense of what was going on? I mean, I just don't know. But it's weird to me that the New York Times would beat the FBI to the story.
Right.
And I hear people saying, well, maybe the military was actually ahead of the FBI. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess show me that evidence, because
Right.
I
We have
absolutely
to
have
do
no
that.
confidence right now. Yeah.
Right. And at this, so then we also found out that his job, he's basically an IT, like a tech person, like the one that when you at the Salem places, we've set up video studios over the last few years. So I'm sure you've seen people throughout where you work with running cables, putting in monitors, putting in
Right.
routers. That's the kind of stuff that he did setting up these systems. So he would have, maybe been able to hack into something. He did have a clearance, but he was not an analyst. So the thing a lot of people are forgetting too is just because you have a certain clearance doesn't mean that you have access to every document or piece of information at that classification level. You still have to need to know it to do your job. And he didn't need
Yeah.
to know any of this stuff to set up networks.
This is absolutely amazing. Listen, Jennifer, can you stick with me to the bottom of the hour? Is that possible? All right.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, so now Washington Post was dealing with this other young man that was on this platform. I guess he was going around giving information. Let me ask you this: what's the significance between this guy allegedly being at Fort Bragg, which he was not, but ultimately at the Massachusetts base? Does it matter?
As far as the access he would have had, not really, because so at Fort Bragg is the Joint Special Operations Command, and so that has people from Army, Air Force, Navy there within that part of Fort Bragg. So there are some Air Force people stationed there. And with what they did with his intelligence wing, he was in an intelligence part of the Air Force. And what they did, I've been told from my sources that he would have had like that information would have been going through that base where he was, not necessarily that he should have been accessing it, but it would have been going through there. So for this, it doesn't matter whether he was at Fort Bragg or he was on Cape Cod.
Okay, you say here in the article, you offer a screenshot from NBC News that says officials who spoke to on the condition of anonymity to discuss an ongoing investigation said they have been on to him for some time, which we touched on a little bit here, and that an arrest is imminent, is what they said at the time. But then you say, and it's a great point, who told NBC News that they'd been tracking Teixeira for some time? NBC claims that the sources were part of the investigation. Was it an FBI source? Was it a Pentagon source? These questions
Right.
need to be answered.
Right. Because exactly, who's doing the investigation? I mean, we assume that it's the FBI because the Pentagon keeps playing everything off to them. But if the Pentagon is not doing its own investigation, that's a big problem. We know that they sent out a memo telling people to do a better job of how they handle classified information. I know in the type of place, the type of place where Teixeira was, like if some of these documents and these briefings, they're electronically on someone's monitor. And if you want to print them, you have to have a certain level of access to print them. And if the system is working the right way, it's tracking who's accessed it and who's printed it. So if he took some of these documents out of there, they should have a log immediately of which accounts accessed that and printed it.
I mean, it's such a great point, because I'm sitting there thinking, okay, if this guy originally he was texting some of the information to the other gamers. He gets panicked. He gets scared somehow, but he gets emboldened as well. It's the weirdest thing, and he starts taking some. If correct me if I'm wrong, Jennifer. Some printed documents outside of the skiff. He literally takes pictures of them to put on this gaming platform, which is just honestly, I'm thinking of all the stuff that he did, and I'm like, oh, okay, there's
How
there's
did you know
there's
what he was on?
literally no one there to check that.
Right. And in a skiff, you're not allowed to take your own personal devices in there. So if he was texting
Great
in
point.
there, I mean, unless this person has the best photographic memory that any of us have ever known and can go out and just memorize a whole paragraph and then go out of the skiff, text it, it's not making sense at all. So if he took the camera in there because people said he took pictures of a computer screen, so either that computer screen with that information was outside the skiff, which is a problem, or he had his camera in there. Either way, someone should have known what was going on.
Yeah, I mean it's absolutely stunning to me. One of the things that you write, the most important. This was, I think, from Mark Teaston. You had quoted the most important part of evaluating a source is to determine their access. How do they know what they know if they can't plausibly explain and prove it? But they are giving you good intel. It's being given to you for a reason. Cyber Transport Systems Tech E3 is not given access to sensitive information pertaining to NATO partners, Israel, etc. This is where it just gets extremely crazy and scary. And this is, again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but Biden is in the White House.
Right. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist either, but since it's not adding up, you have to think of different theories of how this could have been happening. We know that he shouldn't have access to this. So was someone feeding it to him? Did he have some
Yeah.
access? And then were they tracking him and going, okay, well, he's getting stuff out and we'd like to get this information out. So then made sure that he had other information that he shouldn't have had so that they could leak it. Because we've already seen some stories today, one about the Russian special forces and how they're all fighting with each other. I think that one was WAPO. And there's stuff at New York Times that is goes with a narrative that the administration wants, that they're saying they got out of these leaked papers. So, I mean, it's kind of hard to not connect some dots there. And plus, the other thing is some of the documents don't make it look too good for the administration. It shows that people were
Yep.
lying. And so they definitely want to cut that down. So is this a way of putting out this information and they let it go out so that then they can label people who are like, yeah, you pointed out the lying, and so now are we all going to be terrorists? The way that they labeled the people who talked at school boards. You know what I say? It
Yeah.
seems like they set up these narratives to then harass people who disagree.
It's the craziest thing, and again, I don't want to conflate the two issues. I mean, obviously, this young man is in a world of hurt as he should be. But it's like the Democrats set up the next shot, and that's what I'm concerned about. Okay, so now what's going to happen? Do we need to resurrect the Restrict Act? We need to go after all of these gamers. I'm looking at all this stuff,
No,
and it's so embarrassing. It's so
right.
embarrassing, Jennifer, that the mainstream media honestly just seems to be working in cahoots with the Biden administration, the FBI. It's like they want to cover up for this horrible administration, because I think this is a reflection of leadership.
It is. And I'm not on one side or another on anything. What I'm thinking is that we all need to have a lot more critical thinking skills. We all need to be a lot more skeptical. I talk to a lot of people in the national security space for the stories that I write. And if I've heard one thing and it sounds pretty much like what you would want to write from my point of view, I always check it with other sources who might know. And I
Right.
ask these people, how do you know? How would you know
All
this?
right.
What access do you have to know this? Ask questions. Just ask yourself questions and don't buy everything that's said.